A miser sold all of his possessions and bought a lump of gold with the money he received. He took the lump of gold and hid it in a hole in the ground next to an old wall. Each day, the miser would go to the old wall and do nothing more than admire his gold. One of the miser's workers noticed that the miser frequently visited the same spot, and one day decided to follow him. The worker soon discovered the secret behind the miser's fixation with the old wall, and late one night stole the gold. The next day, when the miser went to gaze upon his gold, he found only an empty hole. In despair, he began to beat at the old wall and weep loudly. A neighbor came to console the miser, but upon learning the cause, said, "Cease your grieving so. Go and take a stone, place it in the hole, and imagine it to be the gold lying there. It will provide equal service, for when the gold was there, you had it not, as you did not make the slightest use of it." Moral of the story: use your mind. Critical thinking is a framework that encourages you to keep your mind active, to think and learn every day.
Welcome to the last episode in this series. Over the last few weeks, we have looked at various factors that are necessary to turn you into a critical thinker. We've looked at reasons, we have looked at evidence, and we have looked at reasoning flaws. In this last episode, we will pull all lessons together and review and summarize the whole series. In Module 2, we looked at how to determine the credibility of information or evidence that we encounter. When we are determining the credibility of personal evidence, the first thing we have to do is determine the motive of the source. What is the motive? Does the person have a reason to tell the truth, or does the person have a reason to lie? We have to determine vested interest. Does the occupation of the person determine that he must be a neutral party, a judge for example, or does he have a vested interest? Does the person have religious beliefs that compel the person to tell the truth? Is the person a neutral party, one who doesn't stand to benefit? Or is the person one who is a neutral party but neutrality has been reduced due to a number of factors? We have to examine the motive of the evidence. In Module 3, we examined personal evidence. We looked at eyewitness accounts, we looked at hearsay, and we looked at character reference. So apart from establishing the credibility of the evidence, we have to focus on the ability of the eyewitness to observe the incident correctly. And as we mentioned, there are some key questions that you have to ask. You have to ask, were there obstructions? Number 1. Number 2, what was the distance involved? Number 3, what was the angle? Was the angle suitable for the eyewitness to observe the incident correctly? Number 4, what were visibility conditions? How was visibility? Poor visibility or good visibility? Number 5, was the eyewitness distracted? Were there other things happening that caused the eyewitness to lose focus? Number 6, when did the eyewitness actually arrive at the incident? Before the incident, during the incident, or after the incident? And lastly, how was the vision, or how is the vision of the eyewitness? Does he have any vision problems? We now look at hearsay evidence. This is different in the sense that the person who is reporting the evidence is not the person who observed the incident. A man says, "The security guard told me that this man conducted the robbery." Now this man, the one who is giving the evidence, is not the man who saw the event take place. He is relating what somebody else has told him. This is hearsay evidence. Mark's employer is saying that Mark has worked for me for at least 3 years. He has not been involved in any accidents at all. He is a very good driver. Mark is being accused of causing an accident. Mark's employer says Mark's been working for him for 3 years, and as far as he can tell, Mark is very responsible, very good driver. There's no way Mark could have caused an accident. This is a character reference. In Module 4, we examine visual evidence and documentary evidence. The headline says, "Donate generously because millions are suffering in Africa." Now let's apply the 3 lessons that we've spoken about in this episode to this advertisement on a website. Are the images relevant? Do they show that people are suffering? In this case, yes, they are relevant. The pictures show that people are suffering. Are they significant? No, they are not. Because the claim is that millions are suffering. Do you see millions suffering in the photograph? In any of the images presented here? You do not. The significance is not there, although the relevance is there. Are these photographs selective, or do they show the whole picture? Do they show that the problem is widespread in Africa, or is it just confined to one small area? Are they selective? Are they representative of the whole of Africa? They are not. So whenever you see images, always use these 3 criteria. In Module 5, we looked at the factors you need to consider to make a reasoned judgment. So let's review the evidence we have at hand. For corroboration, we have Charles and the teacher, Anand, who saw Charles carrying a large pile of books. That's corroboration, agreement on certain points. Conflict, we have a direct conflict. Charles and Stephen. One says he was pushed down the stairs, the other says he didn't push the other person down the stairs. We have an eyewitness who saw Stephen fall down the stairs but didn't see him being pushed. We have a character reference, Mr. Chong, the discipline teacher who finds Charles' behavior a problem in the past. We have another character reference, Jim, who is Stephen's father, who says that Charles has always been jealous of his son and is prejudiced against his son. Now to top it all, we have contextual information from Julie, who says the stairs are slippery anyway. Now when we view all this evidence, we need to now look at the balance of evidence. Which side has more evidence supporting it and which side has more evidence not supporting it? So when you do a calculation of these factors, you find that Charles has 2 people supporting him and Stephen has 3. Does that mean that we should believe Stephen and not believe Charles? Obviously not. In Module 6, we explored attempts to persuade us, attempts that have reasons, have conclusions and assumptions, and also attempts to persuade us that do not have reasons and only have opinions and conclusions. Evidence comes in 2 forms. The first form tries to persuade you to do something. The second form does not persuade you. The first form that does try to persuade you comes in 2 further categories. One, with reasons, as the chart here shows. If there are reasons attached, it's an argument. Second, without reasons. An attempt to persuade you without reasons is an opinion. If there is no attempt to persuade you whatsoever, it's either an account, which is a description only, no conclusion, or it's an explanation. Reasons only, no conclusion, no attempt to persuade you. In Module 7, we looked at statistical data and numerical data. We looked at the types of errors that creep in when we are examining statistics and numbers. numbers can be very misleading. You have to question numbers when you see them, especially percentage numbers and average numbers. You've got to do the 4 things that we said you have to do. You've got to ask, how meaningful are these numbers? You've got to ask, how relevant are these numbers? You've got to ask, how representative are these numbers? And fourthly, you have to ask, how reliable are these numbers? Now, this information you see on the chart on the screen. 4 things to look at. When you're looking at the reliability of numbers, question how much of data is hidden from you. How much has been left out? How much has been manipulated? Which data has been manipulated? How much has been thrown away and not shown to you? Question the reliability of the data. In Module 8, we started our journey towards understanding reasoning flaws. We looked at the first reasoning flaw, one of irrelevant appeal. We have looked at attempts to persuade you. We have looked at the components when someone is trying to persuade you. In his persuasion, there are reasons, there are assumptions, and there is a conclusion. In previous episodes, we have looked at the form that reasons take, how reasons appear to you. In this episode, we have looked at one reasoning error or reasoning flaw, and that's called irrelevant appeals. There are 4 kinds of irrelevant appeals. The first is when you are being persuaded to do something because an expert or an authority says so. The second type of appeal is based on popularity, when you are told to accept a certain point of view because it is the popular opinion. The third is when there is an appeal to tradition. This is the way we have always done things. Therefore, you too should do them the same way. An attempt to persuade you based on tradition. And fourth is an attempt to persuade you based on history, what has been done over the years. In Module 9, we continued with reasoning flaws, and we looked at 4 different types of flaws, from the slippery slope to restricted options to generalizations and to 2 wrongs don't make a right. One boy says to another boy, "Don't pretend to be good. You are scolding me for copying during the history exam. You are no better. I saw you steal Sarah's money." 2 wrongs don't make a right. Just because the other person is wrong doesn't give you the justification to say it's okay for me to do something wrong. The third type of reasoning error or reasoning flaw is one called generalization, where we generalize one particular situation to many at large. Now, there are 3 types of generalization: one to many, many to all, and a specific example to all. The 4th type of reasoning error is one called restricted options, where you are given only 2 options, 2 alternatives. It's either this or that. There is no middle path, there is no middle road. Typically, advertisements like to use the restricted option to persuade you to follow what they want you to follow. A minor event occurs. It is then linked to a whole series of events which may or may not occur at all. And at the end of it, as a conclusion or as a consequence, something major happens. Something extreme, something unjustified, something extreme compared to what started it. This is a slippery slope. In Module 10, we examined 2 common and popular reasoning flaws. One, between cause and correlation, and the second, the straw man. The 6th reasoning error is one of causation, where we mistakenly think that one event causes another, when in fact it doesn't. On the surface of it, this argument seems to make a lot of sense. Olden days, there wasn't much protein, people died at a young age. Today, there's more protein in our diet, we live longer. Therefore, protein has caused us to live longer. Not necessarily so, as we have seen from the earlier error of causation. But in this case, both the events are related because both have happened at more or less the same time. The amount of protein in our diet has increased, and so has our lifespan. One hasn't caused the other, but they have occurred around the same time. We call this an error of correlation. A distorted view of the argument has been put forward to us. It's not the real argument, it's a distorted view of the real argument. Why has this been done? It's been done so that you will dismiss the whole argument, although on false grounds. In these examples, that is the intention. The intention is for the person hearing the argument to dismiss it, clearly knowing that it's on false grounds. This reasoning error is called the straw man. In Module 11, we continued with reasoning flaws. We looked at two specific ones. The first one, necessary versus sufficient, and the second, attacking the arguer. A sufficient condition is one where you don't need to meet any other condition, and as long as you meet this one condition, your conclusion is guaranteed. That's a sufficient condition. A necessary condition, on the other hand, is one that is the minimum requirement for you to meet the condition. In other words, before you can even going any further, you have to fulfill this condition. It's necessary. Look at him talk about the dangers of drug abuse. He was a drug addict for more than 10 years. Who's going to listen to him? Same issue here. We are not finding reasons why that message is valid or not valid. We are finding reasons why we shouldn't listen to this person. Attacking the arguer. This is an error in reasoning. Module 12, 13, 14, and 15 were a continuation of the journey looking at more types of reasoning flaws that are commonly found in arguments daily. The flaw that you see here is a reasoning flaw called the perfect solution flaw, in which the person who is promoting this idea prefers to wait until a perfect solution emerges. But we can't do that in real life, because if we were to wait until a perfect situation arises, we would be paralyzed and be unable to act. June says that students should be motivated enough to practice on their own. Now, should be and whether they really are two different things, because reality is often in conflict with what should be. Anil's behaving pretty badly, and Ruza has given a label of bad temper to that behavior. However, labeling does not explain the reasons. Labeling doesn't explain why Anil is acting in that particular fashion. When someone gives a label to a behavior or a situation but doesn't address the reasons, this is called the explaining by labeling flaw. The glittering praise flaw, where through praise, the actual subject or the content or the reasons or the qualifications are disregarded and the person is praised instead. A red herring is a flaw that is used to divert attention from the real issue. And typically the way it works is this. Topic A is being discussed. Topic B is introduced into the argument as if it is relevant to topic A, although it's not. Through this, topic A is dropped and topic B is discussed instead. Ordinarily, the burden of proof rests on the person making the claim. But a flaw occurs when this burden is shifted to another party, which is what has happened here. This flaw exists or manifests when someone believes that a particular situation is not true or cannot exist because the person cannot understand it, doesn't know about it, or cannot imagine it. So it's argued from a personal perspective. If I don't know about it, if I can't understand it, if I can't imagine it, it's not true, it doesn't exist. Evidence is demanded. The evidence is presented. But what happens is another set of criteria is imposed to make it harder for the arguer to win the game. This is also called raising the bar or changing the rules halfway. This is a reasoning flaw. So we have a situation where the premise and the conclusion are disjointed, they are not connected to each other, but are presented as if they are. This is a does not follow reasoning flaw, the horse laugh flaw. Let's see how. The objective is to present the argument in such a way that it sounds ridiculous. That's the whole purpose of this flaw, to mock the opponent's argument, attempting to inspire an emotional reaction. It goes after emotions, not logic. The objective is to make the argument appear foolish and go against common sense. The unexplained versus unexplainable reasoning flaw. Just because we do not have an adequate explanation for a phenomena at this point in time, today, it doesn't mean that that phenomena will remain unexplainable forever. It's very likely that advancements in our knowledge may allow us to explain issues that today appear unexplainable. What we see here is the misleading vividness flaw, where an isolated but dramatic incident is taken to outweigh a significant amount of statistical data. A lot of the data may show that there's absolutely no problem with this brand, but one incident is enough for someone to lose faith in that brand, because the description of the event is so dramatic and vivid that it leaves a lasting impression on the mind. The next reasoning flaw is the novelty flaw. This example illustrates how the flaw works. This is the latest fashion, so it is so much better than the earlier products. The reasoning that is being used here is that just because something is new, it is better than the earlier products. This is not always the case. This is not necessarily true. We have come to the end of our series, but your journey as a critical thinker has just begun. In today's globalized world, we have to become more creative and innovative. Innovation can only be achieved when you become an accomplished critical thinker. Critical mind skills, the focus of this series, are the foundation or the platform from which you can rise to become a more successful individual. Good luck and have fun.